so much for joining us today in our virtual coffee talk. As you know, this is like a space that we have together to bring some of our council of organizations. And then we try to select topics that are really relevant. So today we are really pleased and really excited because we have with us Kathleen Montgomery, who is actually the Director of International Relations for the League of Women Voters. So Kathleen, she is a professor emerita and a professor of the graduate division of University of California, Riverside. So Kathleen, we're really eager, to learn a little bit more right now that elections are around the corner. So please go for it.
Okay, thanks so much, Isabel. I appreciate that. Just one correction. I'm not Director of International Relations for the entire League of Women Voters, just for our local chapter, Orange Coast.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yes. Well, I'm really delighted to join you all today to tell you more about the League of Women Voters, about the League's relationship with the UN, and then the critical role that the League plays in assuring elections and human rights. So let me try to, if I can, get my slides up, and we can go.
Excellent. So then just a friendly reminder before we're going to start our presentation, please mute your microphones so we can have like a better, we avoid background noise. And then this presentation is being recorded. So if anyone has any issues, please let me know. And let's go for it. Thank you so much, Kathleen. We're all yours right now.
Okay, this is the title, and I'm going to try to answer the question as best I can. Here's a brief overview of what I plan to cover today. I'll begin with some history of the League and let you know why it's such an important year this year. Then I'll review the long-standing relationship that the League has with the UN and how that plays out in our mutual activities focusing on human rights. And then I'll conclude with some information about the League's current activities in support of a fair election that protects the right to be an informed voter and to cast an informed ballot. So let's begin at the beginning. The League was officially founded 100 years ago today, not today, in this year in Chicago. And it's no coincidence that it corresponds with the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment that extended the right to vote to women. It was a very basically worded amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. But it was a decades-long movement that it took to get to this part. Now, there was a lot of media coverage, especially building up to this, the anniversary of the ratification of the amendment this month. Just last Sunday, there was a wonderful special section in the New York Times entitled "How American Women Won the Right to Vote." And there's also a fabulous two-part documentary that PBS has put together called The Vote. So if any of you is interested in learning even more about this, I would point you to both of these two sources. I thought I knew a whole lot more than I realized that I knew once I especially saw the documentary. So it's nice to get the full story. A major actor in the decades-long movement was Carrie Chapman Catt, which is quite a mouthful. It's a tongue twister every time I try to say her name. But she with other suffragists formed the National American Woman Suffrage Association. And this photo shows one of many of the marches, votes for women, that took place mostly in the eastern states. But for decades, really, the women marched to gain the vote. And when ratification looked like it might finally happen, Carrie Chapman Catt led the formation of the League of Women Voters, which she called a mighty political experiment designed to help over 20 million women carry out their new responsibilities as voters. So the League of Women Voters was established and remains a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to voter education and advocacy. So fast forward 100 years, some of you may remember the Rose Parade, the 2020 Rose Parade, and the League had a float that some of our League members helped decorate. You can see some of the yellow roses, the thousands of yellow roses, which were put in one by one. It was replicating the march in the past. So even the women who were marching in the parade this year wore outfits that they had hand sewn to match the outfits that the suffragists wore 100 years ago, carrying signs that said "Votes for Women." The parade.
Kathleen, stop you there because we're not seeing all the slides. Only the first.
You're not seeing the slides?
No, so you need to move them. You need to pass them when you're presenting. You need to go to the next one.
I'm not sure what you're asking me to do. Okay, let me escape and okay.
Yeah, there we go. We're seeing that one. We're on number 4. Perfect.
But I wanted to show it as a I wanted to do the presentation outline, the
Yes.
full slide.
Yeah.
So the slideshow that doesn't you don't see that?
Yeah, we're not seeing the full show.
Oh, well, okay. I don't know what to say. So you can see this one though, huh?
Yes. You can either do it manually and you start using your arrow if you want to do that.
Yeah, okay. Did you see any of the slides when I put the thing up, the whole one on?
Yeah, we see the first slide, but you need to pass it so we can see it. Yeah. You can go to the next one.
Okay. I'm sorry, everybody. As I said.
Okay, no, it's okay.
Okay.
Perfect. There we go.
Is it big enough though? Can you see it?
Yes, we can all see it. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can make it bigger. How's
Perfect. That's a good
better?
size. Yep.
Okay.
So then now we can go to the one for the parade. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Could you see this beautiful one? All right. And this is the parade that took place in 2020. Okay. So in the intervening years from when the league was started and now, it has grown to over 500,000 members in over 700 state and local league chapters across the country. And the league's goal of empowering voters and defending democracy has permeated all of the league activities. Some of the highlights over the years have included forming the League of Women Voters Education Fund to increase understanding of major public policy issues, sponsoring presidential debates for which the League won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Broadcast Journalism, but most of all working tirelessly for election reform, including advocating for the National Voter Registration Act in 1993, which we refer to as the Motor Voter Act, where people will get registered when they get their driver's licenses, and working to eliminate partisan and racial gerrymandering. The most recent campaign that the League has put together for that is called the People-Powered Fair Maps campaign. Are the slides looking okay now, Isabel? I'm assuming yes. So from the beginning, the League has been an ally of the UN and its predecessors, starting with the League's support in 1920 for the proposed League of Nations following World War I. But the disappointing failure of that initiative inspired the League of Women Voters to be even more outspoken about support for the nascent UN proposed in the waning years of World War II. In the early 40s, the League carried out a nationwide public support campaign at the request of FDR to establish the UN and ensure US participation. By 1945, President Truman had come into office and was so grateful for the League's support that he invited the League to serve as a consultant to the US delegation at the UN Charter Conference. And the League was named one of the first non-governmental organizations officially recognized with UN observer status, and that relationship extends today. Now, I'm proud to say that League leadership has been fundamental in the development of UN bodies and documents, and one of the earliest UN-related activities was establishing the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which was established just the year after the UN was set up in 1946. The committee to establish CSW was chaired by League leader Anne Hartwell Johnstone. The CSW meets annually to fulfill its mandate and to assess progress about what has been done across the globe in promoting women's rights and where things need to continue, where the focus needs to be to continue to work for women's rights. We know that the work is not yet done. The League of Women Voters sends 20 delegates every year to the annual meetings at UN headquarters in New York City, and I was honored to be one of the delegates in 2019 and had been selected to go again this year, but sadly the CSW did not take place because of the pandemic. Perhaps even more impactful is the League of Women Voters' involvement in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And since we're talking about human rights today, I want to spend some time talking about this incredibly important document. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted in 1948 by the first UN Human Rights Commission, which was led by former First Lady and longtime League member Eleanor Roosevelt. The UN Human Rights Commission today is now the UN Human Rights Council, which is led by High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet. And there were a number of international groups and individuals who participated in the negotiations to put together the UDHR. And some of the substantial input that the League had was making sure that the terminology was inclusive, avoiding the prevailing style of the day that referred to men as the default synonym for humanity, simply echoing the words from our Declaration of Independence. We were very proud that the wording which had initially been proposed for Article 1 in the UDHR, all men are created equal, to all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And the League representatives are credited with lobbying to make sure that that change took place. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the most translated document in the world, and it was adopted in December 10th, on December 10th in 1948, and December 10th is now celebrated every year as the International Human Rights Day. So I think it's fair to say that from the beginning, human rights, the United Nations, and the League of Women Voters have been inextricably linked. Now, I'll put in a little plug for some of the work that I've been doing, continuing with the group of people that I met at the UN CSW in 2019. We have formed a group called the Human Rights Special Interest Group. We represent leagues around the country. And we were planning to continue to meet this last March, but obviously we're not able to because it was called off because of the pandemic. But we've continued our work remotely, researching and writing about human rights issues, aimed to educate fellow leaguers and also other community members like UNA. Some of our ongoing projects are a recent article on COVID-19, human rights, women's rights, and the ERA. This is posted on my local league website. And we also have in the works a review of the UN Convention Against Torture and Other Inhuman Treatment of Prisoners, and a review of UN Convention on the Right to Peaceful Protest. All are very important issues right now. Our first completed project was the briefing book on human rights, synergy between policies of the League of Women Voters and the United Nations Human Rights Conventions. Let me tell you a little bit about what this book includes. It is a series of reviews. Each one, it's not a textbook by any means. Each of the reviews is only about 3 pages long, trying to give an overview of these various UN conventions and treaties. We begin with the aspirational document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the next two covenants that we cover, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the first 3 of those then taken together are considered the International Bill of Human Rights. And as I mentioned, the UDHR, the first one is an aspirational document, and all the rest are intended to operationalize those philosophies through structures for implementation and accountability, including monitoring committees and expectations to monitor, to oversee the progress that the various member states are doing. And I believe that a copy of this book online will be made available to people who have signed on today. So let me circle back to the title of my talk, Human Rights and Elections, How Are They Linked? And I want to draw first on the UN International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is the second review in our briefing book and one of the documents in the International Bill of Human Rights. Article 25 speaks directly to voting rights. Every citizen shall have the right and the opportunity to take part in the conduct of public affairs, directly or through freely chosen representatives, to vote and to be elected at genuine periodic elections. And this aligns perfectly with the League of Women Voters' foundational principle that every citizen should be protected in the right to vote, and that democratic government depends upon informed and active participation. This has always been a central tenet in the League's philosophy of empowering voters and defending democracy. Okay, so what specific activities does the League of Voters do to advance the right to vote? A lot of things. Activities are coordinated at the national, the state, and local levels. The League of Women Voters US established, as I mentioned, the League of Women Voters Education Fund in 1957 to facilitate voter registration and to increase understanding of major public policy issues, to provide resources in order to accomplish that, not just for women, but for all voters. The California League of Women Voters Education Fund works hand in hand with the California Secretary of State to make information available to all California voters. And I've put up here a couple of links that I think you might find useful. I love the title of this first one, The Easy Voter Guide for New and Busy Voters. This is produced in collaboration with the League of Women Voters California Education Fund and the California State Library. You could probably just type in, you don't even have to type in the full website, you could just type in the words and I'm sure it would come up. And another document that I think is very helpful to know is a reminder of what our Bill of Rights are, which is produced by our California Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, who some of you may remember seeing at the Democratic Convention on, I think it was the last night, speaking about the right to vote and what the secretaries of states around the country are doing to preserve that. I want to highlight another incredibly valuable resource for voters in California, which is called Voter's Edge. Again, you can just type in Voter's Edge and it will come up. And this is a joint project that the League of Women Voters of California Education Fund has with MapLight, which is a nonpartisan research organization. It is a comprehensive online guide to elections that I think you will find is just an invaluable resource. Now, as I said, this is for California, but the League of Women Voters US operates a similar site for all other states called Vote 411. So for anybody who may be not in California, I would point you to Vote 411 and you'll find similar information about that. So let me show you a little bit about how Voter's Edge works. The first thing that will come up is a screen where you type in your street address. I know this slide's a little small and I'm hoping that you can see where that, there we go. How's that? Is that a little better?
Yes, it looks good.
That's better. Okay, type in your street address and your zip code and up will come a customized ballot for you based on your voter registration. That shows you all the local, state, and national races that you can vote on. And I'd like to say Voter's Edge is organized by a team of volunteers across the state who work really hard to make the site as complete as possible, gathering information from candidates and from the Secretary of State. We don't write the information, we just populate it with what information is sent to us. And we have each county in the state has a coordinator. Our own league member, Petty Van Reckum, serves as the Orange County coordinator for Voter's Edge, working really hard to gather the information that we need to populate this wonderful website. So I put in my street address, and these are the candidates for my local election. It's still being populated. It should be more complete by the end of this month, maybe early September. The candidates supply the information, at a minimum, their occupation and 3 policy goals, but they also can supply a lot more information about endorsements, donors, videos, position papers, that sort of thing. And it's in their interest to supply as much information as they can in order to make sure that voters are fully informed for an informed choice. Information about propositions will also be added to Voters Edge once the proposition wording has been finalized and okayed by the Secretary of State. That should be available by the end of this month or early next month. It will include information about the budget impacts that comes from the Secretary of State, and also information about the sponsors of the propositions, whether it's a ballot initiative or a legislative constitutional amendment or a referendum. There's also a ton of information about where you vote, how you register. So you can see across the top there are links, pull-down menus with lots of information that any voter in California might need. So let me say something then about what our local chapter does. Let's see. We are, as a reminder, we're known as the League of Women Voters of Orange Coast, and we have a very active voter service committee, which is chaired by Michelle Musacchio. Michelle and her committee worked especially hard during the 2018 midterm elections, because this was the first vote period when the new vote centers was going to be rolled out in Orange County. So for all of the people who are attending who are in Orange County, you would already know about these vote centers. But this was part of the Voters' Choice Act that was passed in California in 2016, which was intended to be a rollout over several elections, moving from polling places to vote centers. So voters in a vote center county, and Orange County was one of the first vote center counties, could cast their vote at any vote center, did not have to show up at a polling place on election day. And the vote centers are open for several weeks before voting day. All of the voters receive a mail ballot, every registered voter in the county, and then can take the ballot, return the ballot to any vote center in the county that they wish to do. And then the Registrar of Voters in the county collects the ballots from the vote centers, which are operated by employees of the Registrar of Voters. And this is really important, especially now, because of the problems that it looks like we may have with the Postal Service. The Postal Service will deliver the ballots to individuals, but it is the Registrar of Voters who will collect the ballots. So they will not need to be returned through the post office. Governor Newsom has recently ordered that every registered voter in the state will now get a mail-in ballot, not only those in the counties that have moved to vote centers. And I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming that even those counties that have not moved fully to vote centers will have drop-off boxes where people can deposit their ballots without having to put them back through the mail. A couple of other things that our local league chapter does is a very ambitious voter registration and education effort for new voters. Sadly, we were not able to do this during the spring and now because of the schools closed because of the pandemic. But it's in California, students who are 16 and 17 years old can pre-register so that by the time they turn 18, they will automatically be registered voters, but also helping to educate these new voters about the whole voting process and what that means. An additional series of activities that we do is to handle candidate forums where we will provide a moderator and maintain the forum, again, making sure that it is completely nonpartisan. But we want to make sure that in these candidate forums, all of the candidates who are running for a particular office will be present, so it doesn't look as though the league is trying to put the finger on the scale for any one particular candidate. And also similar kinds of forums what we call pros and cons to talk about the ballot arguments and budget impacts with information that's provided to us from the California Secretary of State. Again, I just want to say, please continue to check on our local league website. It serves as an information resource for voting locally, statewide, and nationwide. We have a news link, so it's updated quite regularly. And our local league president, Becky Newman, has a presidential blog she tries to keep us all updated with any breaking news that we might need to know about voting. There are a couple of links on our news link, a couple of sites on the news link about the U.S. Postal Service information, including a press release that the League of Women Voters U.S. has recently put out, and also some talking points about the issues that I think people might find useful. Again, I think we have an advantage in Orange County because we are a vote center county, and we do not have to rely on the U.S. Postal Service to have our ballots be delivered back to be counted in the way that a number of places around the country do. So I hope that I have shown you how the UN and the League of Women Voters concur that women's rights equals human rights equals the right to vote. And I would just close with vote. And that is my talk. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kathleen. And I totally agree with you. I think that the main point is to go there and vote. This is a right, but I also think it's also our obligation. You know, I think that when people are complaining, I always ask people, what are you doing about it? So then a way of exercising our rights, I think that that's the most critical and crucial thing. And thank you so much for giving us this comprehensive, history and trying to understand about the connections and how we started from the beginning, and the League of Women Rights was always there, like a foundation, like a really strong foundation. So from now, if you can actually go into the right, you can, anyone who is participating with us, you can actually have access to different websites. So Kathleen provided different tools and websites that are actually really useful. And then what we did is that we laid them out so that you can actually even access them right away or even later. So I think from now, we're going to take some of the questions. And I know that Grady is actually, he's currently serving as our treasurer, and then he's going to be taking from this part. So then feel free to start asking questions, because this is the moment, as we all know, November is around the corner. So then we all need to play our part actively.
Absolutely. No, I don't disagree at all. I'm going to start with kind of some more generic questions, and then I'm going to very much open the floor to everyone that does have questions. I do ask that everyone, again, stay on mute. If you do have a question, unmute yourself. I'm going to start with probably just 4 or 5 kind of some high-level questions. So I guess the first thing is I know you mentioned, and believe me, I'm a huge fan of the voting center aspect and component. What's one way that we in Orange County, from, I guess, not as individual members of the league, what's one way that we can support voting efforts throughout the state from our level, I guess you could say, as your citizen voting who's informed about voting but doesn't necessarily have any sort of organizational interest other than as a human rights factor? What's the best way that we can sort of support voting efforts throughout the county and the state?
Well, one thing I would say is it's my understanding that the voting centers still need employees. And so if you can go onto the Registrar of Voters of Orange County, I would imagine that there's a link there. And there's been, as Trevor Noah and others are trying to do, is getting young people to be poll workers, or in this case, to be workers at vote centers, and for which there is pay. I don't think it's very high. I mean, I was a poll worker back when we still had polls, and I think I got $15, but I imagine working at a vote center, it's a little bit more than that. But I think that, for a starter, I think we really need to have people who will be able to facilitate those voting centers, and they're going to be operating more than just on voting day. They're going to be operating for, I think they're going to be open at least 2 weeks, maybe more, in advance of the election. So I think that would be a really useful way that you could contribute. The site that I put up about the Easy Voter site, the easy link to the Easy Voter, I believe that organizations can download copies of that document and just stand on a street corner and hand them out. Make sure, talk to everybody you know, just to make sure that they know if they're not registered, how to register. Offer to, now we don't have the problem of driving people to the polls on voting day. You know, encourage early voting is just so important, and the vote centers are designed to really help get the vote done, so that there's not just this one huge push on November 3rd.
Exactly. No, I think that's a valid point. And in fact, Seema had a follow-up question, which is, are there marketing materials or other sort of promotional items that either the league has or that other organizations have that we'd be able to at least share from a nonpartisan perspective at the very least? And I imagine the answer is yes. So
yeah, again, I think that Easy Voter link
perfect.
Would be, you know, and I think you can order them in quantity.
Perfect.
If you're an organization, a nonprofit organization, I think they'll send you as many as you want. And because that's put out by the California State Library as well, I mean, that kind of information will be at the libraries, but I don't even know if the libraries are open right now. They probably aren't. So, you know, we're going to have to be a little more innovative in how we get the word out.
Exactly.
At the League of Women Voters National Convention a couple of months ago, I was moderating a panel on voter registration and education in high schools. And what they're doing now is using sandwich boards with signs on them that say, register to vote, you can register here. And I would imagine that, I don't know whether we have anybody who would feel like standing out on a street corner with a sandwich board, but you know, we have to go back to some of the very basic ways of reaching people that maybe we thought we had moved away from.
Exactly. No, it's a valid point, especially in this pandemic environment that we're in. Some things are more innovative, and some things it is definitely about going back to the basics. So I can't argue with that. Another question that I thought was at least kind of interesting, because I know this gets brought up, especially we are a very advocacy-oriented group, much like the league is. Is it smart, and I know that we kind of, and I will say this with a little bit of, you know, not pride necessarily, but I think there's an element of truth. We're very lucky to live in California in a lot of regards with the way things are done, which leads to my follow-up question. Is it smart for California voters to try and reach out to people in other states in terms of encouraging them to vote? I know sometimes there's always that argument of you don't necessarily want California to go out and start dictating to the rest of the world. Is it smart for us to try and advocate in that way, or is it better to try and focus on our own local aspect? And that's a genuine question, because I know we get it sometimes too with UNA advocacy. Is it smart to try and reach out to other states or not?
Well, I think the patriotic responsibility to vote is not state specific. Mm-hmm. And I think we certainly saw that all this week at the Democratic National Convention. Urging everybody, you know, no matter where they live, to vote is something that I think we all have a responsibility to do. And people urging them to vote and then tell everybody they know to vote. So I think get out the vote is just a patriotic responsibility.
No, that's good, and that's a valid point that you bring up, because it is. It's for everyone across the whole U.S. It is definitely important that, and that message of voting, regardless of where everyone might feel, is definitely important to get out. Kind of keeping at least on the local topic here a little bit, and I personally take a little bit biased interest in this, but again, I'll open it to more questions later. What are some areas that you've seen, both maybe Orange County and California in particular, do really well from a voting perspective, versus not only just other states in the United States, but even other voting systems throughout the world? What are some successes that California's really had? And what are some areas that you think still need improvement, at least, that we could potentially focus on both in state and, you know, maybe even out of state?
Well, that's a big question. I don't have stats. I don't know, for example, about voter turnout based on the use of the vote centers compared to use of polling places. And it's hard to tease that out to know whether, if the turnout was higher, was it because of the components of the election, or was it because of the election logistics about vote centers? But my guess is that we will see the use of vote centers throughout the country growing, because I think there's been just a lot of enthusiasm about how well the vote centers worked, how happy. I haven't heard any downsides about the way the vote centers operated in the county. I haven't gone out and sought to find that information, but the concept makes so much sense. And because it addresses the issue about early voting, so that you don't have the debates in some cities and states around the country where you see long lines that are, or the people only have a very, very small window. The vote centers enables so much. The early voting, the voting in person, the mail-in voting, not having to rely on the post service. So it seems to address so many of the kinds of controversies that we've been hearing about with such concern this election and in previous elections too. I think this is why California moved to this. And we're rolling it out more slowly perhaps now than they had initially. They were initially going to roll it out more slowly than it looks like it is now.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point, because I mean, again, I've only voted ever really by mail personally. I can speak at least myself, and now with the voting center aspect, it's also a nice alternative to be able to have if you'd rather drop off. I'm not going to deny that at all. And then there's just kind of to pivot on that. I don't want to. I'm very happy with it. Are there any areas in California that you think where it's still like, oh, we still maybe need to kind of push a little bit more? Areas where it's like, yeah, we've made good progress, but there's definitely some steps that we could take further. At least from not just an advocacy perspective, but from an information perspective, just knowing that these are kind of areas that we still are not necessarily where we could be.
Well, I think voter registration in the high schools and education for new voters is something that we still need to work really hard on. And we have found, our local committee found that there was some reluctance in the high schools. Some teachers and some principals did not necessarily want us to come in. And I think partly that's because of a misunderstanding about the nonpartisan nature of the League of Women Voters, and that we were not in there to lobby for a particular candidate. It would be really nice if the local schools would make this be a part of their curriculum to a more explicit degree than they are now. I know that Model UN, I don't know whether Model UN goes into any of this sorts of thing, but I think there still remains a lot of lack of understanding. I wouldn't say misunderstanding, but lack of understanding among high school kids, new voters, just what voting is all about and what the process involves. And to have it be something where the schools are more welcoming. I think at some high schools, our committee was lucky to have 15 minutes in a cafeteria rather than time in a civics class. Some teachers were very welcoming, but some teachers were not. And so it was sort of a hit or miss kind of a thing. And it would be very nice if that were made more systematically part of a curriculum, and just an expected part of a curriculum as part of being a responsible citizen.
No, and that's a valid point you bring up, because I went to high school here, and I can honestly say I don't remember them ever discussing voting at length as part of the curriculum. And it's like you said, as you come up in your senior year, that's when everyone starts to turn 18, and it's especially in a year like this, it's important that that message gets communicated about the rights to vote. So no, it's interesting. I don't think a lot of us would have thought otherwise about that. So it's good that you brought that up as a point, because knowing that resistance in the school system, and I know the school system can sometimes be open to change and sometimes not so open to change. So that's always a hurdle to have to work with. So that's good to know. Obviously, fake news has become a very big trending hashtag in the past couple of years, but partisan issues with fake news aside, what's one of the largest forms of voter misinformation out there? So not necessarily about what a particular candidate may stand for or not stand for, but misinformation on voting itself that is out there. And what are some ways that informed voters can fight against that information and informing others about that, type of voting and misinformation that's out there?
Well, that's a good question. There is an initiative that a group in the Virginia area is engaged in that is, we've looked into it, but we haven't signed on to it yet. It's called Squint, See Something, Say Something on social media. And for anybody who uses social media can take a screenshot of something that they think is not accurate information, send it to this group, and then they will determine whether it's accurate or not, and then notify the local registrar of voters or the Secretary of State about to try to get this misinformation taken down. It's kind of a complex, I think it's a fabulous idea, but implementing it is kind of tricky. And it's been implemented in several spots in Virginia, but I don't think California is yet doing it. Maybe because there's not as much concern in California, because we are pretty much at the head of the, we're pioneers in terms of a lot of voting. But other than that, I think there's a lot to be done there, and a lot of innovation that's I'm hoping is still in the works.
Right. No, and that's a valid point you bring up, because again, a lot of times if people don't see if they see something and then they just let it go, if there's no reporting of it, then it'll just go unnoticed until someone says something. And then to kind of, this will be kind of my last question, and then I'll open it up to the floor a little bit. Obviously, we're both organizations oriented on human rights factors. And so I guess from a human rights perspective, what is the biggest way that the human right for voting is currently being, I mean, I know suppressed is kind of obviously specific more to voting, but I guess violated in a more general sense, both here, I guess, if you want to say either in California and the United States, and even on the international scale. I think, we're obviously focusing on the human right factor. What ultimately is the way in which that the voting right is being violated, I guess you could say. And again, both locally, we're kind of all aware slightly, I think, of voter suppression, but even on the international scale, I think there's, there's probably violations going on there too.
Yeah, I mean, voter suppression, who knows, all kinds of violations that we hear on the news about elections, which are not at all free and fair around the world. And we have had election monitors. Jimmy Carter, for example, has been an election monitor around the world for many years. But I think we often tend to take voting for granted, and we don't equate the right to vote with it being a basic human right. And that's why I wanted to emphasize those UN documents that really articulate this very explicitly. And it aligns with the League's positions on that the right to vote is a basic human right. And I think if we think about it in those terms, sometimes it's a little more compelling for people to say, well, I'm going to fight for this human right. And it's certainly in everybody's awareness this year because of the right to vote being extended to women and the 100th anniversary of that. And you think, it's only been 100 years? I think we so take for granted and realize, wait a minute, we had to work really, really hard for that, and we can't ever take that human right for granted. And I think it also shows some of the attacks on voting now shows that we can't take any of our human rights for granted. We have to continue to preserve them and think of them as human rights.
Exactly. No, and I think you bring up a valid point, especially the League of Women Voters, and given the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, that this is people do forget about that human right factor, that they do take it for granted and just say, oh, the election's just going to happen, the voting's just going to be normal, and they don't think about the steps that it's taken, both for a lot of groups that would, that are considered, minority in the past, whether it's women, whether it's African American, whether it's whatever. There's been a lot of, fighting in order to be able to get that, franchise out. And I think people do take that for granted. So it's important to remind everyone. those are the kind of the questions I had. I'm going to open it up to the floor if anyone else has any questions. Please remember to unmute yourself and don't all go at once. Just remember to unmute yourself and then mute yourself back on if you have any questions for Kathleen.
Grady, I had a question.
Oh yeah, no, please go ahead.
Thanks, Kathleen, for that background. I like to rely on the power of the social media to kind of highlight some of the things you've mentioned. Is there anything that that is social media friendly that kind of highlights the struggles we've had to get here, the struggles of the different groups to have that right to vote? Is there anything that we can put out there?
Well, I mentioned at the outset the PBS documentary on the vote, which I think, just advertising the link to that. It was put together in July, and I think it's still available. It's an absolutely amazing documentary. It was just such a sobering reminder of how hard women worked and how much resistance they encountered before they finally got finally won the right to vote. I'm not a very savvy social media user myself, so I'm going to have to defer to the younger generations who know about that kind of thing to know what are the most impactful ways that you can send out this information, whether it's links that you can put on there to remind people. But again, I wish I had more that I could suggest for social media. It's not my thing. I'm too old.
Thank you. This is good information. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Seema. Michelle, I know you had a question, so if you want to go ahead and unmute, go ahead. Michelle, you're still on mute.
Yeah, Grady, I have a question. Carl.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead quickly. I live in assisted living with my wife right now, and of course we're shut-ins because of the COVID virus. But I'm just wondering, what is in the works in Orange County to take shut-ins and other people that don't have cars, particularly, to voting centers? Is there public transportation, or what's possible?
I don't know what is official, but I would say contact our League of Women Voters and say you'd like someone to come and do that for you. Part of our voter service is helping people who don't have their own transportation. And actually it used to be driving people to the poll on voting day, and now it's sort of collecting people at assisted living facilities and helping to deliver their ballots.
I think you should give that wide advertising.
That's a wonderful suggestion, and I will pass it on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know whether, some assisted living facilities also have vans, and they maybe,
Yes, we have one here, but not everybody would have that.
Yeah, yeah. But that's a really good suggestion, and we will discuss it. Thank you. Thank you, Carl.
I have another question, but I'll defer that till later.
Hi, Kathleen. This is Michelle. I work at a college, and I wanted to know, do you guys have any kind of like a toolkit to be able to do voter registration? And I know we can go to a website, but kind of like a set of procedures on how to do a voter registration online.
I'm not aware that we do. I know that the Voters Edge site has a link with a lot of questions that you can have answered about how to vote, how to register to vote, and it includes voter registration online. So it's not very difficult to figure it out. But whether there's a specific voter registration toolkit, I'm not aware that we have one. but I can also look into that.
Yeah, I was just looking into kind of like the process of doing it online, because, you know, I may have 100 people coming to the webinar, and after that we're going to have a voter registration, and then I'm just trying to figure out a way of doing it where it's not a mess. You know?
Yeah, that's really good, and I will take it up with our voter service committee to see how we might be able to help put that together. When will you be doing that? Soon?
October 14, 15, okay. And 16.
Okay, we'll make sure that we've got something back to you before then.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Mm-hmm.
This is Yasu. Can I ask a question?
Please, Yasu, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Very, very succinct. I really enjoyed it. Two questions. This is on the home front and also on the international front. You mentioned about the Carter Commission that goes around the world monitoring voting to see if it has been fair or not. But here at home, we have had voting where it was a mess again and again, especially, you know, in the time of Bush and Al Gore, it was a mess. And again, in the time of Hillary Clinton and Trump, it was a mess. We have our own voting system that has been, the least to say, you know, even China or Russia was messing around with it. So we need to clean our home first before we can go around the world telling others how they should vote or shouldn't vote. Number two, when you mention human rights, again, I remember Hillary Clinton went to China to get a very good publicity, to get this outspoken critic of China who was arrested, getting him released and bringing him here. And, you know, it looks good to advocate human rights, but here, right here in our country, we have black people being shot and strangled on a regular basis. Where is their human right? Human right is not just only in voting. Human right has to start from the very basic. So what is the stand of women voters? What do they do on these issues? And how can we help the Black Lives Matter movement so that these kind of abuses can stop? Thank you very much.
Well, you've raised issues that we all anguish over every single day as soon as we turn on the news. And the League has been very outspoken about the need for racial justice. They have issued some press releases about the League position on it. It's such a huge topic that it's very difficult to know even where to start. So, but I'm going to go back and talk about your first question about voting monitors. One of the things that makes it tricky in our country is that there is not a federal voting system. The voting systems are all handled locally. So you have a state voting system, and then in every county, like Orange County, we operate our voting system not necessarily the way any other county in the country operates. And because voting has been delegated down to the local level, it's difficult to have an across-the-board set of requirements that we can enforce the way I think happens maybe in a number of other countries. The only national requirement is the actual voting day, but how the votes are handled is done at a local level. And some states are more progressive than others in terms of how they do that. I think we're very proud of the way California does it. And we would hope that maybe we'll be serving as a model for other places around the country. I think we are. I think that several states are now moving to full mail-in ballots, and the concept of vote centers, now that it rolled out so successfully in 2018 in several counties in California, that other states will be paying attention, and I hope starting that too.
No, appreciate that, Kathleen. It's a good answer. I think it's like you said, it's a matter more a lot of times of timing. Does anyone have any other questions they would like to ask? Carl, I know you said, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead and ask it now. I'm quite familiar with all of the articles that are in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And some of them, like Article 25, talks about the right to vote. There's also articles that talk about the right to medical care, the right to a vacation, the right to education. And what I'm wondering is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is now 75 years old, and some of the articles now have been put forward as treaties. For example, the rights of prisoners, that was done very quickly after the UNHDR was adopted. Is now the time to start pushing to have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights become a treaty and have those rights that are mentioned that people a lot of times simply ignore become law, international law? I'm asking an opinion here because there's a long conversation that would follow.
Yeah. I mean, that's a philosophical question. And as I mentioned, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been considered an aspirational document.
Yes.
And that the subsequent conventions and treaties were supposed to put teeth into that and to be, to take it apart and say, well, for each one of these, here are the structures where we can implement this particular aspirational human right, and then this next treaty, how we can do this one. And because it is voluntary, that member states across the world have signed on, some more than others, and sadly the US hasn't signed on to all of these at all, or if they do sign on to some of them, they'll sign on to them with caveats, as they did the second covenant. So the UN doesn't really have the power to impose sanctions to the extent that we wish that they would in some cases when we see rights being blatantly violated. I don't know, my own, since you asked for my own opinion, I like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as it is, because it is such an uplifting aspirational document. And I like the idea of having subsequent treaties and conventions that are designed to try to implement the philosophies that are articulated in the UDHR. But obviously, we see that in many cases, that hasn't been enough. And shunning and shaming countries that aren't living up to, even the ones who have signed on to this, who aren't living up to what they've signed on to, doesn't have very much power, as we wish it did. You're making me depressed. I don't know what else to say.
Well, that wasn't my intent. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thanks, Carl.
It was great.
Great. So should we move forward?
I think so. No, I was going to say, if anyone has any last minute questions or comments that they'd like to include, I mean, the floor is very much open. So, but I was going to say, I think it was a pretty comprehensive education. I know, at least for me, it was. So I do definitely appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathleen. It was very informative. I appreciate your time. This is a very critical time that we're living in. And I think every person that can just, give us more information and help us move together, is very appreciated. Thank you so much for all the information.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, so echoing all the comments that have been said, I totally agree. We had a really comprehensive and most necessary conversation today. I really want to thank Kathleen, for taking the time and then breaking things so we can really understand the origins, the process, and how critical is this today. And of course, the mission that you guys with the League of Women Voters are being working actively since the beginning and still moving forward. So I want to actually talk a little bit about what we do. So now to connect the dots. So then my name is Isabel Tritle, and currently I am the president of the United Nations Association of Orange County. And here at the United Nations Association, our goal is to educate, to to inspire and to mobilize individuals about the critical and vital work of the United Nations. So then, of course, we have created this type of spaces where we actually collaborate and educate people. But most important, it's not just about learning about issues, but then it's about actions. So then that's what we ask all our members to be really aware and having like something that is aligned with what you believe. And then again, we cannot take for granted, like the voting, we actually used to take it as a granted, like our human rights, we cannot take them for granted. So then we also have different type of affinity groups. We have the affinity group for UN Women. We also have another affinity group for young professionals. We also have another affinity group that is actually not an affinity group, that is actually the Council of Organizations. And the way that actually we connected and then we created this space of the virtual coffee talk was by bringing this type of organizations that they're pretty much aligned with the United Nations mission. So then we find our common ground, we find a bridge to put the word out there. And the most important, we are thinking globally, but acting locally. So then I want to give right now the space to Joy Adams so she can actually talk to us and let us know a little bit more about the Council of Organizations.
Well, of course, we're very honored to have the League of Women Voters be a member of our Council of Organizations and to partnership with the League in many ways over the few years that you have been a member of our Council of Organizations. So we are just absolutely honored to have the local chapter of the League be in partnership with us. I am a member of the local chapter of the League and have great admiration for the work that the League does. So thank you for your very comprehensive presentation for the history and the vital work that the League has done, is doing today, but has done for so many years to bring us to today. It is just really an honor to have you make this presentation, Kathleen. Yeah. So I'm not sure because everybody's muted and there on my screen there are very few faces, just a bunch of circles. And normally when we have in-person coffee talks, everyone has an opportunity to introduce themselves. And we invite any of the Council organization members to talk just a little bit, you know, like a minute or 2 minutes about their organization, and they have an opportunity to make a pitch if they have upcoming events or anything that they are advocating. So I know I saw on our attendance list that besides the League, we have 4 other organizations. And so if I call your name and if you are on, I welcome you to talk about your organization and give any announcements. The first one would be the Virginia Bernal, who is with the Citizens Climate Lobby. Virginia, did you manage to get online? No?
No, I don't see her, Joy.
No. I know when we were having in person, sometimes she would have other meetings, but she was registered to attend. And the next one would be Seema Ali, who has a brand new, she's just forming a nonprofit and just joined the Council of Organizations for the Interfaith Task Force. Seema, I know you're here. Will you talk a little bit about your organization? Did she leave?
I think she
she
left,
left.
Joy. I would say
Yeah,
I'm looking at the list. Yeah.
yeah, she left. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And another organization is the National Association for Equal Justice in America. Hardin Walker. Is Hardin here? I hope people didn't have so much difficulty signing on that they gave up. I'm really concerned about that because I had difficulty. Kathleen said she had a little difficulty, and we've got to get that corrected. So, but we can't do it today.
No, I don't see Hardin here either.
Yeah.
I don't see him, Joy. So yeah.
Yeah, and then Christy Matthews with Santa. Is Christy here?
No.
No. Well, we're pleased that they signed up to be here. Maybe they came on and got off, but hopefully it wasn't for difficulty of signing on, because we, as I look at 20 people attending today, that's less than half of those that signed up, which is a concern. Yeah, because they missed some really, really important information. And Kathleen, we will make sure that your briefing book for human rights gets sent out. But I think also we should send some kind of review and the links for our members and to promote the websites that they can get the information from the league, and let them know how vital information is available to them with just a click.
I can also send you, say, a PDF of my slides, which has all the links on it, and you could send that as well. So would you like me to do that?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, I know there were too many links on there for people to pay attention to. Yeah. Okay, I'll do that. I'll prepare a PDF and send that. Shall I send it to you, Isabel? Or to
You can send it to Diana.
Okay.
You can send it to Diana and then maybe copy Joy and I, and then that will be like, but then Diana will be in charge of spreading it out effectively, even to the people who were not able to attend. And then of course we will have this recording, which I think that people will find it really beneficial. Go, Joy.
Yeah. Yeah, I want that separate from the briefing book, because I have a cover letter to go to the briefing book. Mm-hmm. So I want that. I don't want them sent together.
Perfect.
Absolutely. We will ask Diana to do it.
Yeah, I'll work with Diana and getting the briefing book, because Kathleen shared it with me when we first started talking about her presenting here, and I was so excited about the information in it. I asked her if I could share it, and was waiting till after her presentation, because it is just such a lovely, lovely ebook. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. We're really eager to have it be distributed as widely as you think people would be interested in. So
we'll send it to our 1,000+ constant contact, because it's really lovely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you so much. And if anyone is in attendance now that belongs to an organization that wants to partner and collaborate with us, you can contact us on our website, una-oc.org, and look at our partners. We have an application and a little more information. But the main thing, I think, then the reason that we established our council of organizations was to increase the work that everyone is doing by getting it out more, and to provide opportunities for the organizations to get their word out, both with networking, and we place a link to the website for our COOs on our website. And also we will take the organization's events that are in alignment with what we do and forward them as a partner event to our constant contact list. So there's real value to being, besides the relationships that we are formed, especially once we can be in person again. So thank you again, Kathleen, and I'm signing off to you.
Thank
as
you,
well.
Joy. Thank you for all your interesting questions, everyone. It was just delightful. I really, really loved being part of this.
Excellent, Kathleen. And then the link to our Council of Organizations is already on our chat. So if anyone is interested to learn more, to sign up, then you can access the link that is already there. And I'm also right now attaching for all of you our link to our membership. So then if you're not a member, you can actually become an active member of UNA Orange County. And then, as I mentioned it before, we have different opportunities. So then we have different activities that is not just about information, this type of spaces, coffee talk, but we also have our UNA Women Chat, which is another affinity group that is really relevant. We also have a young professional and youth engagement kind of affinity group. So then there is something for anyone. You can actually tap your passion, you can tap your interest, and then you can become more active. Because as I mentioned, our mission with our chapter is to think globally, but acting locally, trying to connect what we're doing here. So then we have different options. You can actually sign up as introduction. So then you just only pay $25, and then you can actually start renewing. What is going to give you access? It's going to give you access to the material that, of course, whenever we're having an event, and if it's an event that we have certain type of tickets, you're going to have like a reduced ticket. You also have access to the foundation and to UNA USA as a national component with all the presentations and the material that they're doing. So currently they're having all the GEOs, which are these type of webinars, and they are bringing really high qualified speakers. So then you will have access to that type of material, and of course you will be able to connect with like-minded people and organizations that they have similar goals than you. So then I think that this is a perfect space also for getting to know great people. I have to admit, thanks to the Orange County chapter, I have made great people and I have made great friends that are really aligned with my ethics and my passions. So then some upcoming events that I want you actually guys to invite you. We have really interesting something that we launched recently. We have the chat series. So then in September 16, we are going to have our women's suffrage. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, so I apologize. Sufragio. And then, so then for that information, you are going to find everything in our website, where we are going to share all the details and the link. Then we're going to have our division event, which is to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the UN. That is going to be on October 14. It's going to be from 12 to 2:30, and it's going to be a virtual event. And finally, we're going to have also our UN celebration in a really special day. We're commemorating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, and the way that we're doing it is by we're going to have a panel where we're going to be inviting some speakers from Chapman, Cal State University, Fullerton, and then UCI. So then please stay tuned, and we will love to see you around about it. And then again, Kathleen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your knowledge, but especially thank you so much for your passion, for everything that you're bringing. And as you said, we cannot take for granted. This is a right that we all need to move forward, and always vote, and vote. Anyone has anything to say? Any questions so far? Any comments? No? I think we're good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your weekend, and please stay safe.